Okay, so we've got our task 1 essay where we've got obviously like a graph. Let's take a look at the topic. The graph below shows average carbon dioxide emissions per person in the United Kingdom, Sweden, Italy, and Portugal between 1967 and 2007. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant, okay? So the first thing I always tell candidates to look at is look at the dates. Look at the dates on your graph, okay? So it's going from 67 to 2007. So that means everything you talk about will be in the past, okay? Everything needs to be talked about in the past. So we've got the CO2 emissions going down the side. We've got the years going across. We can see the different countries. The first thing you need to decide when you look at your task 1, how are you going to divide up your information, okay? In your overview, you need to be sort of making a general comment about the theme, the general theme of the data that you've seen. And then you support that by giving 2 sort of specific parts in your essay. Okay, so the classic task 1, 3 paragraphs 1, where you give your overview and theme, and then you sort of give your comparison 1, and then your sort of comparison 2. Okay, the key thing is they really do want you to make comparisons during your task 1. So the easiest way to divide up your structure is to think, okay, in what way am I going to split this data and how am I going to make comparisons, okay? So when I'm looking at this data, the first thing I'm seeing is that we've got 2 countries increased and we've got 2 countries decreased, okay? So the United Kingdom and which other one? The United Kingdom decreased and Sweden both decreased, okay? So I'm thinking first these 2 went down, Italy and Portugal went up. Okay, so I'm thinking that's going to be my that's going to be my comparison, I think, looking at this data, because it's only one graph. So I think I'm going to do my paragraph 1, my detail point. I'm going to be comparing the UK and Sweden, because the UK declines quite steadily, but then Sweden, we've got this big sudden decline. And then in my paragraph 2, I'm going to be comparing Italy and Portugal, because both had quite like a steady increase. But, you know, Italy remained at a higher emission than Portugal. Okay, so I think that's going to, if I was doing this, I think that would be my comparison. So in body 2, I'm comparing the UK and Sweden, and then I'm like, on the other hand, 2 other countries actually increased their amount of carbon emissions per person. However, they both had, you know, a steady increase over the time period, and then give the details about that, and then say, however, Italy still remained a higher, you know, CO2 producer than Portugal. Okay, so if I was going to divide up this task, that's how I would do it, probably. Lots of chances for comparison, and it's sort of like a very logical divide, the countries that increased, the countries versus the countries that decreased. And then in your overview, you want to make sort of a general comment about the theme. So I'm like, okay, my overview, first I'm going to paraphrase the information in the graph. So it would be something like, the graph displays the changes in carbon dioxide emission per person in 4 countries across a 40-year period. Overall, 2 countries increased their emissions, while 2 countries decreased their emissions, and all but 1 country had a very steady change over time. Okay, so then I've summarized in general what I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to give my detail point. In detail, both the UK and Sweden decreased their overall carbon emissions, kind of thing. Okay, so I think that's how I would approach this essay. Let's see what this candidate has done. The line graph illustrates average carbon dioxide, the average amount of carbon dioxide that a person emitted in 4 different countries from 1960. Is that right? The average amount CO2 emissions in metric tons. Average. Oh no, it is emissions per person. Yeah. Okay. That's fine. In 4 different countries from 1996 to 2000. I like that, in 4 different countries. From, I think this could also be paraphrased into something like across a 40-year period would be a better paraphrase. Overall, an opposite trend was seen between countries, which meant that while the average CO2 emission in 2 countries increased constantly, 2 other countries' emissions decreased. Okay, so they have picked out the same thing I picked out. I noticed that an opposite trend was seen between countries. I would an opposite, because that makes me think that between all the countries, everyone had a totally opposite result, which isn't quite true. I would say something like overall, there was a divide between countries, which meant that while the average CO2 emissions in 2 countries increased, I would say consistently rather than constantly, because we don't know if it was constant. It was consistent, like it kept happening. Emissions in the other 2 countries decreased. Okay, I would have liked to have seen these guys included in one paragraph together, your paraphrase and your overview, but I think that's fine. All right, then we move on to the United Kingdom. Considering United Kingdom, we should firstly, considering the United Kingdom, comma, which had the highest CO2 emission, over 10 tons in 1967, people used less CO2 as time went by, but still maintained the highest figure of CO2 for 40 years. Okay, so that's fine. We've started with the United Kingdom, okay. On the other hand, in Sweden, where people use CO2 for the second, at the beginning, the emissions at the second highest rate. Sorry, that shouldn't be crossed out. At the beginning of the period, the emissions increased dramatically until 1977, showing almost similar emission figure of about 10 tons with the UK. Then continued, decreasing significantly and fell to no more than 6 tons. Okay, I can kind of see that this candidate, they're sort of doing their comparisons as they go along. I can kind of, they're comparing, like that's fine. Emissions figures about 10 tons, and decreasing significantly, they fell to no more than 6 tons. They're sort of comparing as they go along. Are they going to do each country individually? Unlike the above 2 countries, Italy started with the amount of 4 tons of CO2 emission and increased continuously, and finally recorded about twice as much as that of 1967 at the last year, being the second highest country of CO2 release. Also, for Portugal, the figure of CO2 was less than 2 tons in 1967, but kept increasing during the year. After some stagnation between 1997, I like the word stagnation, Portugal showed the same amount of CO2 released as Sweden, which was more than 5 tons. Okay, so what this candidate has done is they've literally just gone through country by country. So where we saw, like, I was going to sort of band it into 3 paragraphs, this candidate has gone sort of 1, paraphrase, paragraph 2, overview, paragraph 3, UK, paragraph 4, Sweden, and then for some reason paragraph 5, Italy and Portugal together. Okay, so can you see how that's not, it doesn't feel logical as you go through? Like, I thought it was strange that they put these 2 countries together. If you're going to do country by country, why not just do country by country? Okay, so one of the skills they're testing you on in task 1 is, are you able to sort of logically organize information and consolidate information together? So, I mean, I don't see, there's no reason why they couldn't have put Sweden and the UK together. It was a sort of odd that you've got all these little tiny paragraphs. And then your comparisons feel more consistent as you're going through if you've got Sweden and the United Kingdom together, considering that they are comparing to the UK. Why not put them in the same paragraph? That's kind of odd to me. They do describe the data quite well. They do try and do a lot of comparisons all the way through, which I appreciate. They do have pretty consistently good vocabulary. Emission increased continually, recorded about twice as much. Their comparisons are sort of pretty good. I just find that the organization is slightly weird. So for task achievement, they have done comparisons. They have sort of described the data reasonably well. They have sort of, picked out, the thing about picking out main features is being able to sort of describe a main trend and then describe it with specific details. Okay, so for example, we're talking about the United Kingdom. Okay, so your first sentence of your United Kingdom paragraph should say something like the overall trend of the United Kingdom. So you're saying, overall, over the entire period, the United Kingdom, despite declining in average amounts, the United Kingdom remained the highest producer of CO2. Okay, that's your overall theme, that's your overall trend. Then you get into supporting with the details, okay? So what this candidate's kind of done is they've mixed that together. Rather than doing like theme sentence and then detail support, they've kind of pushed those two together. So that's what it kind of means in the question where it says reporting the main features, making comparisons, and then you want to support with data. So I would want to say something like your theme would be, firstly, considering the United Kingdom, which had the highest CO2 emission over the entire period, despite a gradual decline. The United Kingdom began, and then you get into the specific details. The United Kingdom began with producing over 10 tons per person in 1967. Yet people used less as time went by, and finishing at however many tons in 2007. You know, and so you do theme, you do detail, you do theme, you do detail. Okay, so one of the dangers a lot of candidates have in task 1 is they just list detail. They're just describing. Okay, so in terms of task achievement, I think, you know, reasonably good. I think I would want to give a 5.5 for task achievement here. Coherence and cohesion, actually, tell you what, if I give a 6 for task achievement, where I kind of want to mark them down as coherence and cohesion, because it was very sort of odd paragraphing and what didn't really feel very organized. Okay, so I want to give a 5.5 for coherence and cohesion instead. Vocabulary, I actually thought vocabulary was reasonably good, so I think I would rank that as a 6. Their grammar, there was a couple of instances like wrong tenses, things like that, a couple of missing words. I do always kind of understand what they mean, which is kind of okay. So again, I think for grammar, they did try and use different types of complex sentences, so I want to give a 6 for that. So I think overall it's sort of a 6 for this answer. But I would really want them to work on their paragraphing, on their organization, to be breaking into those higher level bands.